Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here at Cabot House in Boston. So we are picking up the Wasteland Biographies, and I thought it'd be interesting to cover some of the characters that we're going to talk a bit about in my next science series, which is all about immortality. So we're starting here with Jack Cabot. So the Cabot House is located, if you've not actually been there before, done the quest, in Beacon Hill, so we're kind of directly south and over the bridge from Bunker Hill and near Picnic Gallery and the Old North Church. So it's very likely that you'll stumble across this place, or you'll stumble across Edward Deegan, who basically wants to hire you to work for Jack to do this quest. So there we go, here he is. So I've come here to Parsons State Insane Asylum because once you complete the quest, if you sign with Jack, he kind of stays here for a little while. So this is where he held his father, Lorenzo Cabot, for quite a long time. So Jack Cabot here is over 400 years old. He was born sometime in the 19th century, so the 1800s. So he's been around for a very long time. He's not just pre-war, as in the War of 2077, he's pre all the world wars, because he was definitely born before World War I in 1914. And in 1894, his father Lorenzo travelled to the Rub al Khali Desert in the Middle East, it's kind of the south of the Arabian Peninsula, and he returned wearing some strange artefact on his head, along with some supernatural abilities and a bit of madness thrown in for good measure as well. So because of the kind of psychosis that Lorenzo was showing, Jack here decided to imprison his father here, which is the Parsons State Insane Asylum. So on the map, kind of near Linwoods, so a bit of a dangerous spot on the map because a lot of Deathclaws make their home there, but kind of up here in the north, then there's Parsons Creamery. So Parsons State Insane Asylum, and Lorenzo has been here since 1898. We're obviously in 2287 now. So yeah, long time to live in this one tiny little room, but here we are. And what Jack did was he was trying to study this artefact and find a way to remove it safely without killing Lorenzo, because when they tried to just take it off, his blood pressure dropped and his brain activity flatlined. So he tried different ways to remove it to save his father. During his experiments, he discovered that the serum from Lorenzo's blood could be made into something that basically halted and reversed aging, and that meant that he and his family could stay alive for a long time and still stay relatively young, because he certainly doesn't look like 400 odd years old right now. So he then could continue his research because he realised that Lorenzo wasn't showing any signs of ageing, and that's how he kind of figured it out. So he maintained his position as head of the family by basically periodically faking his own death and pretending to be a distant relative to come forward to inherit the Cabot estate. So this was all just to hide the fact that he wasn't ageing and keeping it all secret from the world, because obviously if he had magic live forever serum, a lot of people would potentially want that, and it could cause some problems. So it was something that he knew had to be well hidden and covered up, so he went to a lot of trouble in order to do that. So when the bombs actually fell, he rushed over here to Parsons with Edward Deegan, who was in his employ at the time, to help kind of manage the family's affairs and keep them safe and various things, and they ran over here to make sure that Lorenzo was still secure and wasn't going to be able to escape. Because of the radiation exposure, Edward ended up becoming a ghoul, which meant that he could be a trusted employee of Jack's for a long time and save Jack having to replace him when he died, essentially, or when he aged enough that he had to retire from doing his job. Because the mysterious serum from Lorenzo doesn't just reverse aging, it does also have a radiation preventive effect, which you can see. I don't know if I've got any in my inventory. No, I don't. But yeah, it does. It reduces all your rads and things like that. So yeah, Jack here had all of that. And that's what allowed them to live through the aftermath of the war. And then he could keep up his research and learn about the alien precursor race that his father had been investigating. And he does mention that he knows of another location that he wants to investigate for potentially more evidence of this precursor race. And it's somewhere in the Mojave Desert, which is kind of interesting.
I only wish I'd been able to find some way to cure my father before it came to this. I still believe that with a little more time, I might have found some way to remove the artifact. But it doesn't matter now.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing. So in the game, he ends up hiring the sole survivor, the player character, to help him secure the serum that's been stolen by raiders and to deal with Lorenzo, who's using his telepathic abilities to get raiders to come in to basically free him from this. So if you side with Jack, you end up having to kill Lorenzo, which he knows is kind of was necessary, but he had thought that if he had a bit more time he might have been able to actually resolve the situation without killing his father. But because of what Lorenzo was doing with the raiders, it kind of left him no choice, that's what we had to do. And if you do side with Jack, after a while you do notice that he starts to visibly age and his mother does eventually die. He does also, at one point he can mention that he knows that you're pre-war, that you were born in the 21st century, and he says that he can tell that from your appearance, your mannerisms and your health, and I think the way you talk and things, which is kind of an interesting thing. So we'll head back over to Cabot House to have a look at his terminal entries and various things, so bear with me and I'll see you there shortly. Here we are, so we're back inside Cabot House, which you have to say is one of the nicest indoor environments in Fallout 4, obviously being well kept and well cared for by these people, which fair enough, if you're going to be stuck living in the same place for a few hundred years you want it to look good. But this here is Jack's kind of at home lab and his terminal. So Jack Cabot's based on a real scientist, a rocket scientist by the name of Jack Parsons, so that's obviously where they got the Parsons State Insane Asylum. But there is a Cabot family that was part of the what was called the Boston Brahmin, and that's the first families of Boston. So this was kind of a group of families that just kind of first settled when a lot of British people started settling in North America, and obviously Boston and Salem and Massachusetts was a very common kind of landing place for a lot of people coming from Europe to North America. So the Cabot family in Boston descended from John Cabot, who was born in Jersey, and I mean the British Channel Island, Jersey, which is probably what the state of New Jersey was named after. But he was born there in 1680 and then emigrated to Salem, Massachusetts in 1700 and established his family here as part of the first families of Boston. So kind of an interesting backdrop there, that he's based on a real scientist and they've combined that with a real kind of old family that settled very early in Boston and the surrounding area. So kind of an interesting one. Although, so we can come here and we can get into Jack's terminal, which is expert locked, but it contains a few interesting things, and I'm not going to read all of every single entry because that probably gets a wee bit dull, but I think it's interesting to have a look at a few different things. So he's setting up this new computer, 1968, newfangled contraptions, as his mother said, but he thinks it's going to be really, really helpful. Yeah. And then we have a little note here where he's still learning how to work the computer and he can't fix his name. So there's a funny thing where he has a 0 in his surname instead of an O, and if you read his sister's terminal you'll find out why. It's quite funny. But he's going to transcribe all his notes into the system so that he can access them, but he wants to summarise the progress that he's made in assessing his father's condition so that he knows kind of where he's at and what needs to be dealt with. So he's made several attempts to directly remove the artifact and it's been unsuccessful because his blood pressure tanks and brainwaves flatline whenever they do try to take it off, and he has attempted full anaesthesia, so general anaesthetic where he's unconscious, local anaesthesia where he's conscious, but anaesthetics applied to the local area, and that hasn't worked. He has intended to use some different antipsychotic medications, and he's got a list of doses and medications to try, and also doses of LSD, in order to try and facilitate removal of the device. So he's kind of concluding that maybe they have to disable it somehow to be able to safely remove it. He's also been careful with kind of handling the artefact since the early days, because he caused potential physical symptoms in Lorenzo when he tried to remove it or mess with it, so he really had to try and understand it before he wanted to mess about with it too much more. Makes sense. So he's done some diagnostic imaging scans, he's done x-rays, which haven't really given him any information, and radio imaging again hasn't really given him any information. There's no kind of way of seeing the internal workings of the artifact or what's actually inside it, so he's tried a few different things. He has done some more scanning, which has given us electromagnetic emissions from the artifact and varying strengths and wavelengths, so potentially there is something to do with the electromagnetic waves that's how the artifact works. So he's kind of coming up to all these kinds of things, and he's looking for more advanced tech from the military potentially to try and do something there. And he has noted the symptoms that the artifact has caused in his father, so paranoia, psychosis, halted aging, telekinesis, increased physical strength, and changes in his blood chemistry. So if you don't know, when you get blood tests done for assessing, say, like your organ function and things, so one kind of blood testing is called hematology, which is where it looks at all the blood cells, so your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelet counts, all of that stuff. And then there's also blood biochemistry, which looks at a number of kind of things in your blood, like protein levels, electrolytes, so like sodium and potassium levels, liver enzymes that can indicate liver function, blood sugar, all these kinds of things, to assess your organ function and check that your electrolyte levels are all normal and things. So that's kind of biochemistry that you would do on serum. So obviously there's been changes in his blood chemistry that he has picked up on from taking blood samples of his father, various changes from human norms and unidentified substances. So it could be communicated to another person through blood transfusion, and he's been able to produce the serum that has a lot of the beneficial qualities and few side effects. So this is the point where, when he started testing his father's blood, that's when he discovered that he could make this mysterious serum, this anti-aging serum that's kept him alive all these years. But he's still not 100% sure he understands exactly what it's doing. And he's done imaging of his brain, skull's intact, there's no physical kind of intrusion from the artifact into his brain, there's no physical connection there. So he's just like, I don't really know how this is actually affecting Lorenzo. It's really quite interesting. And then he discovers the Abramelin field, which is like a basically dampens the electromagnetic waves that come off the artifact, and that has blocked his telekinesis, his telepathic powers and things to a degree. And the whole reason for the quest beginning is because that started to fail, and he's been able to kind of bypass it and sort of communicate with the raiders to try and get them to come in and get him out, basically. So quite an interesting one, and he's obviously spent a lot of time working on this and learning everything that he can. And then this little note is just about how he deals with hiding the fact that they don't age and they don't die and they're living forever without everybody knowing about it. So he calls it a generational shift. So his mother and his sister have gone for a little trip abroad so that he deals with this. So he's basically having to fake his own death and then pretend to be a relative to come back and inherit the estate and continue to live. And it's a bit more difficult as time and technology improves, but money still talks. So he's obviously having to use a bit of bribery and, paying people to be trusted that can keep the secrets of the family and keep on top of things at the asylum. So kind of an interesting thing that he's having to do that. And then he does rename himself John Cabot, which interestingly links back to the original John Cabot that emigrated to this area in 1700 in the real world and started off the Cabot family. So that's quite an interesting one. So his long lost cousin, and he's returned to claim his inheritance after the freak accident that claimed the lives of Jack and his family. So he's having to remember that he has to answer to the name John now, and he's, changed his appearance, he's grown a beard and all that kind of thing. So yeah, quite an interesting one, and this is obviously what he's doing to hide the fact that they have this magic anti-aging serum, because obviously if they didn't, then everybody would want it. Then we're on to 2023 here. So he's looking at a kind of portable version of the Bremelin field to keep his father under control, which would be useful if they ever found that they had to move him from Parsons to take him somewhere else, which is kind of interesting. So he is still focusing on this, and he's obviously had a long time to work on it. And then this is the point where he hires Edward Deegan, who we've met. You generally meet him when you're starting out the quests, or he'll approach you to give you the quest to start with if you don't find this place yourself. But he's kind of not realising how much time is passing, but he's realised that his old employee Daniel is ageing and he'll have to retire, so he's got to get a replacement, and that is Edward Deegan, which is really interesting. And his mother seems to like him, so he's like, yep, that's good. And that happened in 2058, and then we're getting to 2075. He's been still having issues. He's not been able to fix this on his name on the terminal, and he even got Robco out and they managed to kind of do something with it, which is really quite funny. And then 2076 is where things get interesting here. So he's not been paying much attention to current events, but his sister's latest boyfriend is high up in some government agency and talking about how close things are getting to full-scale nuclear war. So he's kind of realising that, the writing's on the wall, nuclear war does seem likely, and at this point a lot of people are starting to realise it, especially those that are kind of involved in government agencies and potentially the preparations for what's going to happen. And what he's kind of speculating on is if this is going to be like what happened to the people that created the artifact on Lorenzo's head, who were potentially some alien precursor race. And he's like, well, who's going to inherit the earth? And he thinks it'll be cockroach civilization, and that kind of thing. So yeah, kind of an interesting one that he's kind of speculating, like, oh, well, if we do have a nuclear war, what's going to happen to the world? Which is interesting. And then, yep, December 2077 really happened. He's not quite come to terms with what it means, because it's been one crisis after another, and we're not out of the woods yet. But the fact that they're doing better than most people, at this point there's proof that the serum doesn't just stop aging, but it protects them against radiation. And there wasn't a direct hit to the city. But he made his way over to Parsons as soon as possible to make sure that Lorenzo couldn't escape. And at this point, where Edward goes with him and he gets a heavy dose of radiation, and he thinks, oh no, Edward's going to die of radiation sickness now. But Imogen kind of steps up and helps deal with the situation. And he's worried about making sure that they maintain power supply and security for the house and also for the asylum where Lorenzo is kept. So they're going to have to be careful with managing resources and things. But yeah. And then a few years later, 2080. Yeah, so it's just kind of, there's no law and order, so getting from Cabot House to the asylum is proven challenging because at this point there's probably raiders and desperate survivors and all sorts of, dangerous things there. But at this point he's noticed that Edward has become a ghoul. So he has shown the changes and he finds it kind of interesting that he's now immune to radiation. But there are other people out there that it seems to be happening. But even, it's only been like 3 years since the bombs fell, but apparently there's already prejudice developing against the ghouls. And he's like, that seems kind of silly because they seem uniquely qualified to survive. And one benefit of the end of civilization is that he doesn't need to keep dying periodically, and he can just kind of be himself because there's not any neighbours that are going to get nosy, and he doesn't need to worry about it anymore because there's no society to hide things from anymore, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, at this point he's kind of thrown himself into the work to discover what Lorenzo had theorised, and he's got enough that he thinks it's all true and he would like to explore it further, but yeah, he's just wanting to look into things a bit more, but obviously international travel and things is potentially a bit more challenging for him. But he's kind of accepting that his father was actually genius and that his belief that this artefact was not made by humans is correct. And there's a lot of evidence there. So he's kind of found that his father's theory's been proven, but he doesn't really have anyone to kind of publish it with or anything like that now because society's kind of gone. But I think it's kind of an interesting one that he finally realises that his father was telling the truth. So he's an interesting guy to talk to, is Jack. I do quite like him and I really enjoy the quest line that's involved here. He's rich, he's a bit eccentric, and he's an immortal being in a way. And if you side with him after a little while, he does end up becoming basically the oldest person in the Fallout universe after his parents are both dead. And that puts him at over 400 years, which is way beyond any ghouls that we've met, way beyond Mr. House or anybody else that is kind of an immortal person. But the quest line itself I think is quite fun. You're dealing with these raiders and some of them are kind of souped up raiders because they've used the serum that gives them super strength and that kind of thing. And then you have to kind of make a decision about whether you side with Lorenzo, who is by all intents and purposes a bit of a psychopath. But you get the benefit of him giving you the mysterious serum, or you side with Jack and you get the Lorenzo's gamma gun, so it becomes like a sort of legendary mod for the gamma gun that you can use that's pretty fun and effective. But it does mean that Lorenzo has to die, so there's no more of the mysterious serum available. If you side with Lorenzo, he does basically come here and kill his entire family, so you have to make your decision about who you think is better for you to keep alive versus who you don't really care about. So and I say the house as well, it's just nice to see a house that's actually well maintained, everything's clean ish, and it's obviously a very nice house, very well set up. I've got a lovely wee bathroom here. And I think once you become friends of the family, they do let you take basically everything. I mean, they still use napkins and stuff, we're talking proper like high society here, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, and that's Wilhelmina and Lorenzo there, so they've got the family portraits and things. Yeah. It's really interesting storyline, and it's a fun quest line as well that I think is quite interesting, and there is some good rewards, so you can get your hands on some of the serum yourself, one of which can be used to great effect in Far Harbour, where there's a man that's got really severe radiation poison from the fog, and you can treat him with a mysterious serum and fix him, which is really, really good. And also the Charisma Bobblehead, which is in Parsons State Insane Asylum, so you need to do this quest to gain access to that to get the Charisma Bobblehead. So yeah, really, really good one, and I say it's a fun little kind of nod, so there's obviously references to, you know, one of the founding families of Boston, and reference to another scientist that has kind of very similar things to Jack, as well as a fun little bit of the kind of supernatural, you know, aliens and, you know, all that kind of stuff, which is really fun. Finally, okay, sorry, the loading screens take forever. So, yeah, it's really interesting quest line. I think it's a lot of fun. You get your mysterious serum, you get the charisma bobblehead out of it, and I think, you know, all the chat about aliens and precursor races, and there is mention of some of the kind of Lovecraftian lore and stuff as well, which I think is really, really interesting. And we just end up with this really fun little quest line with some good rewards and some interesting choices to be made as well. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I think next week I would hope that I'll be able to talk about one of the more prominent characters that live forever, and that's hopefully going to tie in with the series and the science of Fallout. So hopefully I'll be able to manage Mr. House, but certainly we'll find somebody interesting for next week's video. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Which side have you typically chosen for this quest? Do you side with Jack? Do you side with Lorenzo? And let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.